Morning, everyone. Welcome to the last Sunday of Preacher Pat preaching in Two Rivers Park, Portland, Michigan. I wanted to start out with a story for you today. It's a poem written by a very famous sports writer, Alumnus Football by Garland Rice. Bill Jones had been the shining star upon his college team. His tackling was ferocious and his bucking was a dream. When Husky William took the ball beneath his brawny arm, they had 2 extra men to ring the ambulance alarm. Bill hit the line and ran the ends like some mad bull amuck. The other team would shiver when they saw him start to buck. And when some rival tackler tried to block his dashing pace, on waking up, he'd ask, "Who drove that truck across my face?" Bill had the speed, Bill had the weight, Bill never bucked in vain. From goal to goal he whizzed along while fragments strewed the plain. And there had been a standing bet, which no one tried to call, that he could make his distance through a 10-foot granite wall. He would wound up his college course. When he wound up his college course, each student's heart was sore. They wept to think bull-throated Bill would sock the line no more. Not so with William. In his dream he saw the field of fame, where he could buck to glory in the swirl of life's big game. Sweet are the dreams of college life before our faith is nicked. The world is but a cherry tree that's waiting to be picked. The world is but an open road until we find one day how far away the goalposts are that call us to the play. So with the sheepskin tucked beneath his arm in football style, Bill put on steam and dashed into the thickest of the pile. With eyes ablaze, he sprinted where the Laurel Highway led. When Bill woke up, his scalp hung loose and knots adored his head. He tried to run the ends of life but with rib-crushing toss, a rent collector tackled him and threw him for a loss. And when he switched his course again and dashed into the line, the massive guard named Failure did a tuttle on his spine. Bill tried to punt out of the rut, but ere he tried the trick, right tackle competition scuttled through and blocked the kick. And when he tackled at success in one long vicious prod, the fullback disappointment steered his features in sod. Bill was no quitter, so he tried a buck in higher gear, but left guard envy broke it up and stood him on his ear. Whereat he aimed a forward pass, but into vicious bounds, big center Greed slipped through a hole and rammed him out of bounds. But one day, when across the field of fame the goals seemed to dim, the wise old coach Experience came up and spoke to him. "Oh boy," he said, "the main point before you win your bout is keep on bucking Failure until you've worn the piker out. And kid, cut out this fancy stuff. Go in there low and hard. Just keep your eye upon the ball and plug on yard by yard. And more than all, when you're thrown or tumbled with a crack, don't sit there whining. Hustle up and keep on coming back. Keep coming back with all you've got without an alibi. If competition trips you up or lands upon your eye, until at last above the dim you hear this sentence spilled: we might as well let this bird through before we all get killed. You'll find the road is long and rough with soft spots fall apart, where only those can make the grade who have the uphill heart. And when they stop you with a thud or halt you with a crack, let courage call the signals as you keep on coming back. Keep coming back. And though the world may romp across your spine, let every game's end find you upon the battling line. For when the one great scorer comes to mark against your name, he writes, not that you won or lost, but how you played the game." The one great scorer. How do we face failures in life? How do we achieve success? How do we overcome failure and disappointment? How do we deal with greed and envy thwarting our every step or every progress? Well, we can go through life in our own strength, which is what I essentially tried to do as a young person, not knowing God even cared or was relevant. I knew I needed help. I didn't know where to turn for it. I didn't really know there was a God who was willing to help, able to help, and wanting to help. So I tried in my own strength and trying to figure it out as best I could what I need to get done to accomplish what needed to be done in life. But essentially, I really just struggled around in survival mode. I never quite reached the success of our Bill Jones in this football analogy poem. Problems are a part of life, it says in the Jesus is Calling devotional book, November 30th. They are inescapable, woven into the very fabric of this fallen world. You tend to go into problem-solving mode only too readily, acting as if you have the capacity to fix everything. This is a habitual response, so automatic that it bypasses your conscious thinking. Not only does this habit frustrate you, it also distances you from me referring to God. Do not let fixing things be your top priority. You are ever so limited in your capacity to correct all that is wrong in the world around you. Don't weigh yourself down with responsibilities that are not your own. Instead, make your relationship with me your primary concern. Talk with me about what is on your mind, seeking my perspective on the situation, that rather than trying to fix everything that comes to your attention. Ask me to show you what is truly important. Remember that you are en route to heaven, and let your problems fade in the light of eternity. That was shared on Facebook by a young lady, and it reminded me of what I've been reading through the book of Ecclesiastes. I just finished this past week my readings in Ecclesiastes, and I want to refer to a somewhat popular section of Ecclesiastes in chapter 3. There's a time for everything, and a season for every activity under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. What does a worker gain from all his toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on men. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the hearts of men. Yet they cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for men than to be happy and do good while they live, that everyone may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all his toil. This is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken from it. God does it so that men will revere him. Whatever has already been will be and has been before, and God will call the past to account. I thought in my heart, God will bring to judgment both the wicked and the righteous, and there will be a time for every activity, a time for every deed. All go to the same place, all come from dust, and to dust they will return. A lot of us are trying to figure life out, and we need to. We need to figure out how to succeed as the world defines it. We've got bills to pay. We have families to support. We have our own reputation to maintain as someone who is striving and doing good. Nobody wants to be labeled a no-good person, a lazy person, and we're all trying to just figure it out and do the best we can. And when Solomon, good old King Solomon, our life experience coach in the Old Testament, talks about his examination of life, he gets very frustrated. It all seems very futile to him. He sees a lot of failure going on around him, and he's really struggling to find the meaning of life. And the real key to unlocking the book of Ecclesiastes is to recognize that the phrase "under the sun" is Solomon looking around from his own human reasoning and observation and trying to figure it out. And when we just try to figure out what's happening on our planet apart from factoring in God, then we really don't get it. It doesn't make much sense. People who shouldn't succeed, people who are struggling and are good people don't succeed, and life just doesn't seem fair. So that took me to chapter 9 of Ecclesiastes. Go, eat your food with gladness, and drink your wine with a joyful heart. For it is now that God favors what you do. Always be clothed in white, and always anoint your head with oil. Enjoy life with your wife, whom you love, all the days of this meaningless life that God has given you under the sun. For this is your lot in life, and in your toilsome labor under the sun, whatever your hand finds to do, do with all your might. For in the grave, where you are going, there is neither working nor planning, nor knowledge nor wisdom. I have seen something else under the sun. The race is not to the swift, or the battle to the strong, nor does food come to the wise, or wealth to the brilliant, or favor to the learned. But time and chance happen to them all. Now, what's most interesting about this whole book of Ecclesiastes, after this struggle and process of trying to understand what life is all about, the wise old King Solomon concluded, now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether good or bad. Now, I have always struggled with, I like Grantland Rice's poem, Alumnus Football, because it shows the responsibility on me as an individual to fight the good fight, to get that fighting spirit and kick that failure mindset out. Don't let it get into my headspace. At the same time, I lived in my own strength and I strove to accomplish what I needed to do and got frustrated. And it all just seemed so futile. I just wanted to give up on life. It was meaningless under the sun. But once I included God in, and that's what fearing God really is, it's just having a reasonable recognition that God created you, and the Creator has placed some requirements on his created human beings. And you are wise if you factor that in. Not fearing God is pretending God doesn't exist and going and doing your own thing, irregardless of what God says in his word. So to fear God and keep his commandments are hugely important. Now I'm preaching with Looking Glass River behind me this morning. So I want to go to Psalms chapter 1. Blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the seat of mockers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever he does prospers. Not so with the wicked. They are like chaff that the wind blows away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. It's interesting here that if you don't choose good company and surround yourself with encouraging people who consider God's way as utmost important, you will find yourself in the counsel of the wicked. You will walk with them. You'll become so comfortable that you will soon find yourself standing with them. You see the progression here, walking, standing, and eventually you will sit with them, hang around with them, and you will not realize to what degree they start to influence your decisions. Now, Solomon was considered the wisest man in the Old Testament. God said specifically he was going to bless him with wisdom. But when Rehoboam came along, he had the counsel of the elders, who said, listen to the people, they're upset. But then he turned to his peers, his contemporaries, and asked for their counsel. And they said, threaten them. Say, my father whipped you, but I'm going to whip you even harder. I'm going to whip you into shape and make you be subjugated to my throne. And went very badly for him. And Solomon even refers to this frustration as if he anticipates it's going to happen. He said, I built all this up, but where's it going to go? Who's my successor? What's he going to do with it all? And I've never seen a hearse with a U-Haul coming behind it. You don't get to take it with you. You leave it to someone else. And yet, Grantland Rice, after 50 years of successful sports writing, leaves us this powerful poem that deals with the challenges of life. But even he faced a huge challenge. Now, this poem's almost 100 years old. Rice had his career back in the early 1900s. In fact, he was drafted, I'm not sure if he was drafted technically, but he went off to fight in World War I. And he left his whole life's fortune in the hands of a friend, $75,000 at the time, which if we account for inflation, that would have the buying power of $1.9 million today. He trusted his friend with all of his worldly riches. And his friend, the article I read said, had bad investments. I think that's a kind way of saying he just really handled the money irresponsibly and lost it all. And in fact, before Rice even came back from the battlefield, he did survive World War I. He found that his friend had lost all of his money and in fact had committed suicide. And Rice blamed himself for this, saying, I put too much temptation in his path. So he knows quite a bit about greed and how it can destroy a man. And imagine a disappointment, thinking you're coming back to some kind of nest egg for yourself after the war and finding it all lost, having to find your way back from all that. Life has its bizarre twists and turns. And the best we can do is find God, accept the help he offers, seek to live life according to his design. The more you are, in fact, in line with God's will, the better off your life will be. Not only in this life, but in the next. So that's my challenge today. Buck up, fight the good fight, overcome your defeats, and press on. Now, I also want to balance this out with the realization, I've seen this frustrating dialogue on TikTok quite a bit recently. A person is depressed and a friend comes and says, well, you just need to stop being depressed. And sarcastically, the depressed person responds and says, oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that advice. Why didn't I think of that? I should just stop being depressed. Of course, there is a process of the will here where you choose life. You choose joy. But there is also the realization that in and of yourself, sometimes you don't have the resources to overcome. You surround yourself with encouragers. You plead to God who made you and can fix you. Don't fall into the default like we saw in that reading of the Jesus Calling where you're going to fix it. Some things are beyond your capacity. And I wanted this last message to be, at least the last message of preaching here in the park, to be a message of encouragement. That you're not the only one going through tough times. I started out with a poem about football because with this whole COVID thing going on, we didn't even know if there was going to be a football season. But one national game has been played. The Bucs are going to play the Saints today. So we get to see Brady again and Gronkowski coming back, playing for the Buccaneers of all teams. And they have their own career paths that they're walking. And the world has attributed to them fame and fortune. I'm not going to speak to them personally because I don't know them very well. But I do know that that is not the answer for most human beings to find true satisfaction in life. I read Bob Buford's book on finishing well, and he's done countless interviews of successful politicians and actors, musicians and athletes who, even in their mid-50s, they attained to what the world describes as success. And they've responded and said, is that all there is? And that was like King Solomon, the richest man in Israel and probably in the Orient at that time, and had all these countries subjugated to himself, and yet he said, it's meaningless, it's futile, under the sun, I just don't get it, until he factored in God. And so when we say fear God, we say knowledge that you're going to have to answer to him. He is the great scorer. And it's not going to be about how you won or lost according to how the world defines winning and losing, but it's going to be how you played the game. How did you live life? Were you always out for yourself, or did you care for others? Were you always trying to get your own fame and fortune, or did you care about God's glory? When you factor all these things in and you find that perfect balance of living for God, living for your own satisfaction, wow, then you're going to have true success. Well, thank you for your time, and it's goodbye for now. And Lord willing, I'll be back for a new summer series in 2021. God bless.